Hi everybody, thanks for coming. We're about to do a tech talk here. You're going to hear from Fred Stutzman about Facebook and some of the work he's done studying Facebook. I just wanted to introduce Fred. My name is Glenn. I know a lot of you from the ORCID team because I'm the product counsel for the ORCID team and a few other things. I know Fred from iBiblio. It's an online public library, one of the early online kind of public libraries out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where Fred's the director of technology. And Fred is also a co-founder of ClaimID, which is a new company, a startup that helps consumers manage their online identities, their search identities specifically. And we're going to hear from Fred today about some research he's done around Facebook and some usage data there. Just a quick reminder before we get going that this will be on Google Video. So that's great. But if you have any Google Confidential questions or comments or anything like that, we'll just wait till after the talk and we can address those then. But without further ado, let's hear from Fred about his study of Facebook.
Okay. Well, it's it's very exciting to be here, obviously. My name is Fred Stutzman. I'm currently a doctoral student at the School of Information and Library Science at UNC Chapel Hill. And my research deals with social networks, identity, and some of these emerging questions that come when people share their identities online. I research the Facebook, and usually I give this talk to an academic crowd who doesn't know that much about the Facebook, so forgive me if you know all of this, and you probably do. But what is the Facebook? The Facebook is a social networking service that primarily exists on college campuses. This is changing as of today and as of a little while ago, so some of this is in flux. But the Facebook claims to have 7.5 million users. It's rolled out to 2,100 colleges, 22,000 high schools, and as of this morning, 1,000 companies. They also claim to be the largest photo sharing site on the internet. And because I usually give this talk to college administrators, that sort of thing, I like to say that the Facebook owns their campus. And I think we'll see why they own it from some of the statistics of the study. And I'd be remiss without showing a picture of the Facebook. As you can see, it looks like any other social networking service. And it behaves like any other social networking service. Let's see, can I do this? Yeah. One of the things that is different and unique about the Facebook is in 2004 when they rolled it out, students could organize their friends into their classes. So they could look in the Facebook and see all of the students in their classes. This proved to be a very, very popular thing as students like to explore the networks that are around them. And we'll take a little bit of a look at this. How did I get to study the Facebook? I started off with a pilot study of how people share their identity in social networking services. So I did a broad overview of a number of social networking services. I got the statistics back, and I found something really, really amazing, that basically 90% of our undergraduate population was on the Facebook, was taking part. And so this was in summer of 2005. Things obviously moved very fast in this space, but that really shocked me. It shocked a lot of people around me. So I said, I'm going to concentrate on this area. I'm going to look and see what I can find out. My first study was a whole network sample. I actually collected the college network, and I started to analyze this. And there's a sort of a bad joke on there because I last gave this talk at a social networking conference, and PIAC is a social networking analysis software, and I'm not so good at it. So I did that, and I didn't get too far. So I said, well, I think I'd like to analyze how a social network evolves, and particularly how a social network evolves from your first day on a college campus. And so the freshman class was about to arrive, and I said, what I'll do is I will study the use of the Facebook of the freshman class of UNC Chapel Hill. So studying the freshmen, it's a longitudinal study. I sampled the network once a week. I collected the profiles of friends of the freshmen. starting the first day of school. And the freshmen, there's not really a notion of verification. I selected people who said that their school year was 2009, they were undergraduates. So I admit that. I was basically looking for some things about how it's adopted, how the friend network changes, what people are sharing, and what are some interesting uses, what's going on, what's the culture of the Facebook like. And so my study design, which I thought was pretty great, turned out to be sort of flawed, because when I sampled the network that first week, I found that 85% of the college freshmen were already on the Facebook. I guess I should have known this, but anyway, it sort of surprised me. So of the 3,750 freshmen at UNC, that's reported by the registrar, 85% of those were on the Facebook. And over the course of the semester, that grew to 94%. And as you can see down there, I also looked at how many of these students are taking advantage of the privacy features in the Facebook. My research revolves around what facets of identity they're sharing. And I found that in week one, about 3% of the network was using the privacy settings. And that grew to about almost 5% at the end of the semester. So as my sample began, this is sort of what the tail end of the adoption curve looked like for the freshmen in the first semester of 2005. And as you can see, we came on with something a little bit around 3,200 and grew that network out. So I think to put a little context around this, we have to look at when they joined. And so as you can see, and I'm sorry if that's really small lettering, but those 4 humps over there that are the big humps are May, June, July, and August. And that actually represents when the freshmen came online. And I looked at those dates and I tried to find out where they clustered around. And as I'm sure you can imagine, those dates clustered around orientation. So how are students finding out about the Facebook in the summer of 2005? They were hearing about it from orientation advisors, and they were going home, and what were they doing? They were looking up their friends. They had met all these people, they had got the lay of the land, and here's this tool that lets them sort of virtually interact with all the people that they've come into contact with. So very strong correlations around the orientation dates for when the freshmen joined. And as you can see, in September, October, November, and December, those late adopters were coming on. So one of the things the Facebook talks about in its public statistics is how often is the Facebook used. They say something to the extent that 2/3 of people who have Facebook accounts log on every single day, and they spend X amount of minutes, I think maybe like average of 20 minutes a person online. And if you talk to freshmen, it seems like it's a little bit longer than that. But I couldn't verify that. But what I could do is I could look and see when is the last time their profiles were updated. And so using that as sort of a stand-in for how often students are logging in, I found that it does sort of look like they're telling the truth. The students are logging in, they're using their accounts very frequently, and I think there's also something about this is they're changing their identity very frequently. And this is how long ago, in this time interval, how many students have updated their profiles. And in December, 67% of students had updated their profiles, and that was sampled on December 13th. So in those 13 days, 67% of the network, the freshman network, had changed something about themselves online. And because I was trying to get some value out of the social network side of things, I thought it would be interesting to see how the social network grew. And so on week one, I saw something like 144,000 friend connections in the network. And over the course of the semester, that grew to something over 370,000 And these are just the friend connections of the freshman class. This isn't the entire network. The entire network, when I did my whole network sample, had something around 1.4 million of these connections. So there's a lot of connections going on and a lot of friends being made. And so this sort of brings me to what the friend network of a freshman looks like. And this is interesting to me for a number of reasons, and particularly because it clashes with my experience. That being, when I went to college on my first day, I didn't know 46 people, but apparently the freshmen do. So there's something to be said here. Over the course of the summer, the students had been making friends and had been building this friend network. And so on the first day of class, I saw something like an average of 46 friends per freshman. And over the course of the semester, that grew to 111. Now this is very interesting to me, and it's interesting to me, and it informs my research because I can't remember the last time I made 65 new friends over 16 weeks. It's just not something that I do, and I think many people I know do. So this is a unique thing for freshmen in college, and it's a unique thing for people in an analogous situation to this. Yeah.
This is a local school, right? It's a regional school. So the difference might also be that a lot of these people went to high school together, and it's a feeder school. So this number is not necessarily because of Facebook, but it just might be that it's a regional school. So you might not get this at a Stanford or Yale or a Harvard, where people come from all over the country.
Yeah, and I agree. And the question was, because this is a regional school, University of North Carolina, there may be a larger number of friend connections on day one because it's a state school and not a national private school. And I agree. But I think really what we're seeing actually is what Dana Boyd says when she says none of this is real. That really resonates with me. What that means is the behavior in here is not really analogous to our offline behaviors. So people friend people who are going to be living next door to them in the dorms, people that they've met once or twice. It's a different type of friendship in this network. And so one of the questions that comes up in these services is, what are they doing? I have my opinions on it, and I think everybody sort of has an opinion on it. And people say, well, they're wasting time, they're hanging out, they're dating, that sort of thing. So let's see, Brett Bumgarner, who is a senior at UNC Chapel Hill this semester, for his honors thesis, ran a study. He surveyed 1,000 people and took a uses and gratifications approach to how they approach the Facebook. So it's very interesting to me. And really what he found out is that in the Facebook, people are hanging out. That's what they do the most. Then they use it as a directory. They use it to look up their friends, see where they are, how to get in contact with them, how to message them, that sort of thing. They readily state that they waste time. And then what they also do is they learn about each other. And that's, I think, a very important thing. I'll talk about that a little bit. And I sort of doubt you can see this or read that, so I apologize. But one of the things that interests me about all of this when people are learning about each other is this notion of identity sharing. As in, I create a profile, I put things out there in the world, and I say, you know, this is me, I want you to see who I am. And an interesting thing about the Facebook and an interesting thing about social networking services in general is how much information is shared and what type of information is shared. And so in this graph with, let's see, with political orientation being reported at 75%, and everything to the left of that is political orientation, concentration or major, relationship status, sexual orientation, hometown, and birthday. So some really interesting things that are being shared at a I wouldn't say alarming rate, but a very high rate. The students are very, very comfortable in putting their identity out there. And I think this has long-term ramifications. And down at the tail of that is photo albums, their website, and their mobile phone number. And I think due to the culture of the Facebook, this is sort of constantly in change. And I think if I sampled now, I'd find slightly different things, some variations. Mobile might be up. And maybe people have pulled back on sexual orientation, that sort of thing. But really, there's a lot of information being shared. So it gives students a good incentive to go and learn about each other. And so I've added some slides to my talk, but one of the fun things I did was I sampled the political orientation of the freshman class. And what I found was that, well, I sort of came at this and I wanted to say, well, I mean, does college really, they say college makes you liberal or something like that. Does it really make you liberal? Does it really, have a noticeable change on, is there a liberalization, or is the college get more conservative, that sort of thing? And really what I found, as you can see, is there isn't a lot of change. So over the course of that first semester, the freshmen in college didn't really change their political orientation enough, and I'm just sort of throwing this in as a fun slide. But it was interesting to me. And I also looked at this photo hosting. Facebook claims to be the biggest photo hosting site on the entire internet. And this is the evolution of how photographs were used in the first, or the last, let's see, what's that, 8 weeks, 7 weeks of the fall semester. That's where they introduced it in week 9. And so, as you can see, that baseline number is about 10,000, and that grew to almost 80,000 in the course of, let's see, 7 weeks. 8 weeks, I'm sorry. So, as you can imagine, that's just the freshmen. And when Facebook claims to be the #1 photo hosting site on the internet, I actually may believe them, because this is a lot of information, photographic information being shared. Now, this particular metric is persons represented in photos. In the Facebook, you can tag your photos with the name of a person. So here's 5 people in a picture. I circle people's names, and it's tied to their profile. Some interesting implications with that. But at the end of week 16, nearly 80,000 people had been represented just in the freshmen's pictures. Okay. So here's where I diverge from my normal talk, and I'll talk a little bit about why the Facebook won. Why, in this crowded market, did the Facebook differentiate itself? What did it do different from other services that ended up with 95% utilization rates, that sort of thing? The first is a notion I call situational relevance. That being, does a social networking service answer a particular need of the demographic it's going after? Freshmen in college are a very unique demographic. They've just left a social network that they've been building for 18 years of their lives, or 17 or 19. They're comfortable in this social network. They've risen to the top. And they move to a new place where they have to renegotiate their social network. Now, they have a need, and that need is to explore the social network around them. So the Facebook situates itself in a very, very, very good place. And that place being, here's all the people you need to meet. Here's where all the social capital is. Here's a place for you to go and explore that. So the notion of situational relevance is, I have a need. Does the social networking service answer it? And the needs of these freshmen are an ability to see the network around them. Another thing is the identity formulation that goes on. And there's identity formulation and reformulation and re-reformulation. The Facebook allows these students to try on identities every week or every day, every hour, every week. Allows them to change that identity. And that identity is really important. And inside the Facebook, that's a walled garden. You can't see out of it. So, and you can't see into it if you're not a member. So these students can try on their identities, and they can try on their identities in front of the people that matter to them, but not to the people they're worried about who might see their identity, their parents, their people from their hometown, that sort of thing. So it gives them an opportunity to consistently reformulate their identity. I talked a little bit about social network renegotiation and situational relevance. Social network renegotiation means I need to go out and find new friends. I have lost a social network. Here's a new one that I need to succeed in. And I think for a lot of college students, you know, academics is important, but you ask a freshman what they want to do, well, they want to meet friends. They want to feel like they belong in this new network that they're taking part in. And so to take part in that network, you have to survey it and make choices about who you're going to be friends with. So there's limited time to know everyone. And because the Facebook really flattens the college network, it gives people a way to make better economic choices, in their opinion, about who's going to be their friends. And when I say economic choices, I mean, where do I want to spend my time? Do I want to spend my time on someone who doesn't share as many interests with me as someone who does? It's really an interesting thing. And really, when students are in the Facebook and they're searching and looking at people's profiles, what they're doing is they're sort of internalizing a lot of this. They're basically saying, if I'm going to have to spend my time making these new friends, who are the ones that are best for me to invest in? And that's sort of a jaded worldview, I think, but the Facebook allows it, and I think students take advantage of it. And so, I'm sort of getting towards the end. So, how does Facebook change college? Well, it does change the college experience in some ways, and I would certainly say it doesn't change the college experience in others. It flattens the campus is one thing. I can see everyone around me. I can interact with the stars and the people who are the friends of the friends of the friends that I see at the bar. All of that is available to me. And that's the same in many other social networking services, but it does do something on a college campus. It flattens it. Another thing that it does is it makes the social life a lot more manageable. And I think students spend a lot of time micromanaging their social life. And so basically what that means is when I have the ability to see everyone around me and know what they're doing and know the parties they're going to and get their messages, and basically I never have to worry about when I'm going to be alone, because I've always got people that I can get in touch with and basically have a social life with. So this micromanagement of the social life is an interesting thing that's happening. And then finally, I think it does change how we learn about each other, how we basically approach how people want to share their identity. And that's the thing, because when I make a profile on the Facebook, I'm making a profile for me, but I'm really making it for you. And because of that, I think that really changes some dynamics of the social network. And so how will it change the office? And because Facebook is coming to the office, and it's here at Google as of this morning, I guess, how is it going to change the office? Well, the Facebook makes sense in the context of the corporations they chose, because a lot of it mirrors a college experience. That is teamwork and teamwork and a need to know the people around you, and the need to sort of know where you are, how you're situated, who is around you. You know, if you look at the consulting services they've chosen, it makes a lot of sense. The students or the workers are incentivized to know who's around them and to participate and to learn. So this is the economic thing. And to that extent, I think it sort of makes sense. But of course, it's not as easy to bring the Facebook to the corporation as it is to the college campus. Why? Because people are really, really concerned about information in the context of companies, and not so much in the context of a university. I mean, I really care if employee A is emailing employee B in the Facebook, but if a student is messaging another student in the Facebook, that's a different thing. So issues of how it changes, and this is sort of how I think it's going to be approached, but how it changes the social dynamics, how it changes these privacy dynamics, and obviously how corporations come in and exert control. Those are going to be some big conversations that happen if Facebook comes and really takes a foothold in the corporation. And so the takeaway of all this is I think what we're seeing, and I think if we look at the statistics and we look at Facebook and we look at MySpace and we look at all the social networking services and we look at the blogs and we look at all of this, we're seeing a mass adoption of a new social technical behavior. What I mean by that is because students are incentivized to use these technologies to communicate with each other because they have this motive. They learn the technologies. They learn them like we learned email, like we learned IM, that sort of thing. And they have these new skills. And these new skills are going to inform how we design technology over the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's going to be here for a long time. Social networking is not going away. Social networking is going to be commodified and be a part of everything we do. And the numbers are staggering, as you've seen, and they're only going to get bigger. And really, the question that I have is how to do it well. We really have to think about how we're going to capitalize on this, how we're going to do social networking right, how it fits in, how it's relevant, and how essentially businesses and people like me can sort of understand this phenomenon going forward. And that concludes my talk. Thank you.
If you guys have questions for Fred, go for it. Just a reminder about anything Google confidential you might want to hold out until afterwards. Also, Fred, if you have like the URLs of any of the stuff you've published about that, you may want to share them with people. They were in the email that we sent out, but just in case.
Can you talk a little bit more about actual usage models of Facebook? For example, are people doing the wall postings? Are they poking? Or is it primarily just browsing? Just, is it possible to categorize it in rough usage scenarios?
The answer to that is they're doing everything, and they're doing everything a lot. And that's sort of the thing that when I get my statistics back and I try to analyze this, I realize that there's so much going on that almost I don't know where to begin. And I'm still in this process of figuring out how do I categorize, how do I put certain behaviors into certain bins, and that's a hard process. But to answer your question, there are some behavioral models. I think I would categorize it that for how people are using it. Now, some people use it just to browse, look at their friends. I mean that I don't know, sit around the computer and gossip. Basically, he said this, she said that, and this undergrad study, Brett Baumgartner, his study is amazing. And if you're into this. It's in this, and I'll get it to Glenn, because it really categorizes how people use the site, and it breaks it down into these bins. The uses and gratifications approach is usually for a marketing. I think marketers use it a lot, but it really makes sense in the context of these questions. But they do. They use it for dating. They use it for sort of the identity formulation. And they're sort of using it for everything, and it's really a proxy for a social life, but it isn't a proxy for a social life because the social lives are continuing. It's just part of it is online and most of it is offline.
Yeah. So you had a set of responses to questions, surveys that have been asked to students on a Likert scale. How were the questions formulated? Because 3.9 could actually be very meaningless on a Likert scale. Your questions between strongly disagree, strongly agree, and neutral, or in the middle.
Yeah. That would, okay, on the Likert scale, how useful are those responses, the responses being from the undergraduate study, the survey? There were a number of responses, and those were the ones that rose to the top. So in the uses and gratifications approach, the student posed a number of scenarios and grouped those into bins, and those were the ones that rose to the top. So down at the bottom, we saw responses more in the 1.5 scale. So there is significance.
You mentioned in the graph earlier that within the first semester of the school, an average student added 55 new friends. And is that sort of that is primarily because the students in a new environment making friends and so on? How much was Facebook as a tool contributing to that?
I didn't hear the last
How much
part.
was Facebook as a tool contributing to that?
Okay. The question is, if the students are adding 65 new friends over the course of the semester, how much is Facebook contributing to that effect? And I think this sort of goes back to how we sort of have to situate ourselves when we try and generalize behavior in social networks outside of social networks. Does the behavior in the Facebook transfer out? Is it really human behavior? And I'm not going to take a standpoint and say that it is. And Dana Boyd says none of this is real, and I think there's a lot to be said in that. So this type of behavior, this friend-making behavior, it has a lot of significance, but it has a lot of significance in context. No, they're not making 65 new close friends over the semester. Those friends range from people they've never met, to people they've hooked up with, to people they've lived with, to people they made really deep friendships with. Because everything has to fall under this sort of singular notion of a friend in the service, you don't get to really pull that out and see how granular that is. They've introduced a way for you to talk about how you met someone. That's not in my study because that's a relatively new thing, but they realize that everyone being a friend is actually not a good representation. So you can talk about how you know someone. Yeah.
If you look at the distribution of friends, average is 110 of those. Is that a few people with a really large number? Or
Yeah. I have, and there are a number of people who have a lot of friends, and there are certainly a number of people who have very few friends. But I would say that that is more or less quite representative. And if you look in the Facebook now and were to sample, you would probably see that those students now have somewhere on an average of 200 friends. They add a lot of friends, and it's actually quite normal. It's quite normal to have a friend network of that size. So certainly there are fakesters, is the term, that have tons of friends. Why? Because students are using these things to connect. They're important in someone's social life. The coach of the basketball team, that sort of thing. He's not actually using the Facebook. It's somebody who set up his profile, and he's got 1,000 friends. But there's not a lot of those, and people really are just connecting like crazy. Is that?
Do you know how that changes over the course of the semester? At the beginning, probably there's some people who went to high school with a lot of other universities, a lot of friends, and other people who just signed up and never actually met anyone yet.
I agree, and the question was, it would be interesting to look at how that changed over the course of the semester, what the trends were, and I think if you looked at the behavior in the beginning, I think it'll certainly be different over the summer than it is once people get to campus and start connecting, but still, because you can look up someone by their residence, what these students were doing was they were looking at everybody who's going to be on their hall, and they were friending them. I mean, that's just nice behavior. I'm going to live with you. I'm going to be your friend. So when they came on, big jump, and then no, they weren't meeting that many people over the course of the semester, and then it took off again once they actually started interacting and meeting people at parties, that sort of thing.
Do you know if anyone's done any studies of whether there's any correlation between number of friends on Facebook and number of friends in real life by some measure?
That would be a very interesting study. No, I don't. I don't know anybody who's done that, but I think I would love to read it.
Is there a reason why only 16% wanted to publish their mobile phone number? I remember actually surprised me. Is that more private? Is they don't want to be spam?
Okay, the question was, why aren't people posting their mobile phone numbers? And that's a really good question because I've thought about this, and I don't really know why. I think I've got maybe one or two guesses. And one is the mobile phone doesn't work in the context of the Facebook. And so what I mean by that is because there's no channel for me to communicate in the Facebook through a mobile phone. So there's no real incentive for me to show that information. Now this is changing because Facebook now has a mobile program and they're rolling it out like crazy, and it's really pretty interesting. And the other thing is, I think students are actually kind of weird about, the phone is sort of the last thing that you always learn not to share. And what I did is in my pilot study, I compared information sharing in these services to the student directory. And even in the student directory, a lot of people pull their phone numbers out. So I think it's, it's like not, it's a gap that the students at the time weren't really comfortable bridging because, I don't know, there's just something tied up in the phone that's a little bit different than your email. That's my guess, though.
It seems that traditionally online has been a sort of culture of pseudonymity where people assume identities and pen names. And these days, one sees sort of a more growing trend towards the use of actual identity, which I think is something representative of essentially doing the online area as a separate area of interaction as opposed to being an extension of your real life interaction. Can you care to comment on that and its possible future implications?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic because it's a very interesting area. The question is there a movement from pseudonymity to using real names and real identity information in a service like the Facebook? Is this a trend? Is this sort of something that we're seeing more often? And I think to a certain extent, if you look at MySpace, if you look at Facebook, if you look at the social networking services, yeah, people are sharing more real information. In my study, I can't verify what information is real or not. All I know is there's the bit and they've shared it. I'm not going to say if it's true or not. But here's the thing. In the Facebook, in the walled garden, there isn't an incentive for you to be anonymous. In fact, you're incentivized to not be anonymous. You're incentivized to take part and to play the game like everybody else. I think the reason is college students are, well, they like to think of themselves as individuals, but it's sort of, you can't be an individual till you've been part of the group, and that's what's happening. Everybody has to play by the rules because everybody expects that everybody's going to play by the rules. When someone meets somebody at a party, they ask their last name. This is new. It blows my mind. Why? Because what happens is they go home and they look that person up in the Facebook and find their information. So if I had to guess, I would say that there's a very small culture of anonymity, as in I'm a lurker in the Facebook. But the information that students put in is not necessarily the real information. There's a lot of culture that is being sort of accreted in the Facebook, and there are codes and there are interesting ways of signaling things. And a student says they're married to another student. I mean, my sister is married to somebody. I didn't know this. I looked up her Facebook. She's married to somebody. It doesn't mean something. It's a signal. It's a cultural signal. So it's the information is sort of real in a sense, but it's not necessarily, I'm not putting my driver's license information online, that sort of thing. There's nuance and they get it.
Example of marriage. Would you say that people take any bits that are available and sculpt them to their own uses in the community, and they'll use the bits that are there, and then make their own uses out of it? The
question is, do people take all the sort of bits that they can share and sculpt them to their own means? And the answer is absolutely. I think you look at a lot of profiles, and for a lot of the students, and almost everything is filled out with something. Now, I mean, obviously, like the mobile phone, you have to put a number in, but all of the sort of free text fields that you can dump stuff in, people have dumped stuff in and they filled it up till the limit basically, and they use it whatever way they want, and trends emerge. The marriage thing is a good example. I mean, all of a sudden students are married to each other. It's sort of a friendship on top of friendships. Because my sister is married to one of her like suite mates or something like that. So, and this is going on a lot, and also it's sort of about cultural signaling. It's if I understand that I put this thing in my interest, it means something, and that's going on constantly. That's going on absolutely constantly, and it's evolving and changing, and you're cool if you're on the the cusp of that.
All right. Any more questions or anything? Or I know Fred will be around for a little bit longer this afternoon. Ask him some one-on-one. So let's all thank Fred for coming by.